the penetrating and piercing gaze of stern grey eyes, in which shone more inquisitive justice than caressing kindness, the gaze of both a judge and a thinker, or amazing eyes in their liveness and depth. These are just a couple of recollections of those lucky enough to have seen the unparalleled writer and just a man of true greatness, Leo Tolstoy, or else Lev Tolstoy, the true pronunciation of his name in Russian. They say the eyes are the mirror of the soul. Perhaps that is why everyone who saw Leo Tolstoy, who met him in person, was struck by his extraordinary gaze. In it, one could glimpse the ceaseless workings of the writer's soul, whether pondering his next literary masterpiece, reflecting on pressing social issues, or else contemplating the foolishness and dishonesty of our world. His thoughts seemed ever present in his eyes. Sometimes don't you wish you yourself could look into them? Alas, that is beyond our reach. But what we can do, what allows us to fulfill at least a fraction of this wish, is to turn to the memories of his contemporaries on the one hand, and on the other to the very home where Tolstoy was born, lived the majority of his life, and was eventually buried. This will in turn allow us, readers, to perhaps better understand the language of his writings, or at least to make his language of thought a bit easier for us. To create this mini-documentary, I have read these 2 volumes of the memoirs from Tolstoy's contemporaries and some additional sources. Along with this, I have also visited the Tolstoy's home, his estate in Yasnaya Polyana. In this video, of course, I will show you some parts of the estate, his home where he lived with his family, his grave, and other fascinating places. As for the memoirs that I have chosen to share today with you in this video, let's agree to approach them with a bit of critical thinking. After all, we are going to see Tolstoy through the eyes of others. Some might have exaggerated, others might have omitted something or overlooked some certain details. And let's not forget that Leo Tolstoy himself was a human being, first and foremost, prone to shifts in mood, capable of saying something he might regret later or even contradict himself. In fact, he spoke of this quite seriously himself. That said, I really think you might find this journey fascinating, so please get comfortable and let's begin. In early November last year, I was fortunate enough to visit Leo Tolstoy's estate located in the Tula region of Russia. The estate itself is quite vast, with an architectural complex that includes several buildings, a stable, and gardens. Today, great efforts are being made to preserve everything just as it was during the lifetime of the estate's owner, Leo Tolstoy. And I have to tell you, the place truly is remarkable. It has a unique atmosphere that fills you with both tranquility and joy. This was my second visit to Yasnaya Polyana, and I sincerely hope it will be just one of many more to come. And since we've mentioned Leo Tolstoy as the owner of the place, I think he would have approved of the idea that we should also mention Yasnaya Polyana's previous owners. don't you think? Yasnaya Polyana was first documented in 1652. Over the next century, different parts of the estate passed through the hands of various owners until it came into the possession of someone directly connected to Tolstoy. According to the official Yasnaya Polyana website, in 1763, Count Sergei Volkonsky acquired the estate. It was later inherited by Nikolai Volkonsky, Leo Tolstoy's grandfather, who played a decisive role in shaping Yasnaya Polyana's fate. It was Nikolai who became the estate's chief architect and expanded its grounds, gradually purchasing additional land from previous owners. Thanks to his efforts, Yasnaya Polyana flourished. Parks, gardens, picturesque alleys, ponds, and a rich greenhouse were established. An architectural complex was also created, including a grand manor house and 2 outbuildings. The Volkonsky house, the oldest stone structure of the estate, remains a testament of this period of Yasnaya Polyana's history. Those of you who have read War and Peace will more likely notice this striking similarity between the names of Volkonsky and Prince Bolkonsky from the novel. Some even suggest that Nikolai Volkonsky, Tolstoy's grandfather, may have served as a partial inspiration for the novel character, even though there are many other speculations. So his daughter Maria inherited this vast territory of the estate after her father's death in 1821. A year later, she married Count Nikolai Tolstoy, both of whom were to become parents of Lev Tolstoy. However, the happy life of the family was abruptly interrupted when Lev Tolstoy, at the age of just 2 years old, was left without his mother after her death, and just a few years later, when he was just 9 years old, a little boy was totally orphaned after his father's death. In 1847, the family estates were divided among the Tolstoy brothers. As the youngest in the family, I was given the estate where we lived, Yasnaya Polyana, wrote Lev Tolstoy. It's worth mentioning that Tolstoy didn't settle here immediately. Before he decided to settle down and start his own family, he had already experienced university life, fought in the Caucasus War, traveled abroad, and lived in both St. Petersburg and Moscow. On the 23rd of September 1862, Lev Nikolaevich married Sophia Bers. Most of the young people's life was spent in Yasnaya Polyana. They settled in one of the outbuildings, which eventually became a home for the whole family. Tolstoy lived there for more than 50 years. Old furniture, books, great-grandfather's mirrors of the 18th century, and family portraits moved into the new house with him. It is this house that is now known as the Leo Tolstoy house. One of the things that has remained unchanged to this day is the presence of horses and animals in general, which Leo Tolstoy greatly loved. According to the observations and notes of the family's personal doctor Makovitsky, who lived at Yasnaya Polyana from 1904 to 1910 and was Tolstoy's sole companion during the first 3 days after his departure from the estate, leading up to his death, we learn about Tolstoy's favorite horse named Delir. Delir was of exceptional strength, intelligent and extremely cautious, obedient. The local peasants were amazed by how Tolstoy wrote. No young man could ride against him, they exclaimed. Indeed, in almost every second memoir, I came across the astonished remarks from people regarding the writer's physical condition in his later years, when he was already in his 60s or 70s. In fact, until his final days, Tolstoy was in such remarkable physical shape that even many younger than him envied his capability, how effortlessly he settled horses, and how he found strength to remain active not just in physical labor, but also in intellectual pursuits. In the memoirs of the same Dr. Makovitsky, we find the following entries. Every day, every hour, Tolstoy worked, overcoming himself to do what was necessary. He was relentless with himself. He knew no laziness. He devoted much effort to resolving the doubts that arose within him and to answering the questions that were put to him, either in person or in writing. What I was almost struck by in Tolstoy was his constant effort to improve himself. He forced himself to work, to take walks, to get up on time in the morning, and never to lie down during the day. He had a profound disregard for his own rest. You might have already noticed my Tolstoy journal, in which I decided to place all the quotes and memories I found interesting in the books and the ones that I'm sharing with you today. And if you're as inspired by Tolstoy as I am, then I'm sure you may want to have one as well, something you can hold, write in, and treasure. That's why I have made these notebooks with a hand-stitched portrait of Tolstoy that you can turn into your own journal or gift to a friend. For those who love visual inspiration, I've also embroidered a portrait of him capturing his essence in stitches. It is framed and ready to become a beautiful part of any reading space. So if you'd like to bring a piece of Tolstoy into your home, this might be just for you. Visit my little shop and choose something. Life at Yasnaya Polyana must have brought peace both physically and spiritually. The nature here truly seems to possess a magical power to calm and somehow ground one's soul. His eldest son, Sergei, recalled, "Father, unlike most, loved and felt the beauty of the forests, fields, meadows, and sky. He would often say, 'How much goodness God possesses! Nature is endlessly diverse. Every day is different from the last, and each year brings unexpected weather.'" A friend of the writer recorded similar memories of him. What was particularly pleasant about working with Leo Tolstoy was the love he expressed at every step, his subtle understanding and deep appreciation of the beauty of nature. Both in winter and summer, he would make his companion feel this beauty, and his attitude would pass on to those walking with him. The person gazing at us from portraits and the pages of his literary works can create different impressions on those of us who look at it. For some, and most likely for the majority, he is a dear old man who likes to tell stories to children and who, as they say, wouldn't hurt a fly. However, there are other opinions, a bit strange and contradictory ones, asserting that Tolstoy was, in fact, a great deceiver, preaching a faith he didn't believe in himself. These opinions grew especially after Tolstoy's excommunication from the church in 1901, which was, among other reasons, due to his complete rejection of the church doctrine, and also after the publication of his famous novel Resurrection. It would be hard to choose, for me personally, my favorite novel of Tolstoy, but if I were asked, I would undoubtedly say Resurrection. I really recommend reading it. Speaking of his excommunication from the church, I think it's also worth mentioning that this event caused an absolute uproar in society. It was written in the newspapers, it was discussed. However, despite the fact that religion and church in general were still of a great importance in society, especially among peasants, playing a key role, or even probably the most important role in their lives, we read in the diary of Tolstoy's wife. On the 24th of February, the excommunication of Lev Nikolaevich was published in all the newspapers. This news caused outrage in society, bewilderment and discontent among the people. For 3 consecutive days, Lev Nikolaevich received ovations, flowers, telegrams, and letters. As for his religious views and attitude towards religion in general, she wrote, "Up until around 1877, the religious mood of Lev Nikolaevich was undefined, rather indifferent. There was never complete disbelief, but there was no definite faith either. Coming into close contact with people, pilgrims and wanderers, he was struck by their firm, clear and unwavering faith. He became frightened by his own lack of belief, and suddenly, with all his soul, he followed the same path as the people. But he became, as he said, happy in his soul. He discovered, in his words, the light. His view of people changed to such an extent, as he himself said, that before there was a certain circle of his own people, his close ones, but now millions of people became his brothers. Before, his estate and wealth were his, but now, to those who are poor, he must give." One of the most accurate facts about Tolstoy and his life at Yasnaya Polyana is that every morning the writer would come straight out here into the yard, where he was already awaited by seekers, peasants, the poor, who always waited for him under the tree in the yard. This place later became known as the Tree of the Poor. There are numerous memories of how Tolstoy would listen to the requests and problems of all those who came to him for help each morning, assisting them with money and advice. In general, life in Yasnaya Polyana, the atmosphere in the house, the village, and the relationship between family members were kind and respectful. The peasants' attitude towards their count was also marked by these qualities. In their eyes, Tolstoy was someone from whom help was always expected, and there's actually plenty of evidence left by the peasants themselves, their children, or even grandchildren, telling stories of how Count Tolstoy behaved as first and foremost as a man, treating everyone equally and greatly disliking when others regarded him as first of all as a count or a master. Starting from the years when he began to experience his spiritual crisis, he wanted to be simply a man, and sought out the common people, according to his family members and acquaintances. Tolstoy greatly enjoyed walking around the territory of Yasnaya Polyana in the whole village, sometimes even walking and up until Tula, and that's quite a lot. These walks brought him great pleasure. He would meet and talk to people, wanderers, peasants, who would tell him stories of their lives, which he would later remember and write down, along with some differences in dialects, some folk sayings, tales, and so on. But what about those people who had an entirely different opinion on Lev Tolstoy? Surely there were some who left far from such flattering memories on him. Oh yes, and there were quite a few, especially those connected to the authorities and the church. That is understandable. In many Tolstoy's writings, essays, and even his literary works, we can find many of the writers voicing opinions on the topics that were deeply unpopular with certain segments of society, let's say. And it was precisely these people who saw Tolstoy as an unnecessary figure, an enemy, someone who could simply ruin everything just by expressing his opinions. In the memoirs of one Baltic German we read, "The Count was greatly disliked by people of his own class and by his neighbors, and most of all, he was hated by the district policemen, as he always defended his peasants from the oppression of police arbitrariness." Perhaps it was precisely his genuine love for the peasants, his deep interest in them, and his hatred of the arbitrariness of the authorities that motivated Tolstoy in 1859 to begin his unique educational experiment. He created a school for peasant children right at Yasnaya Polyana and the surrounding areas. To mention a little about the school itself, the education provided there was based on a completely unique system developed by Tolstoy himself. Any imposed discipline was forbidden. The students could sit or stand wherever they wished. The primarily responsibility lay with the teacher, whose main task was to engage the students' interest. A peasant named Vasily Morozov, Tolstoy's favorite pupil, wrote that the Count conducted lessons not according to the textbooks, but according to the plan devised by his brilliant mind, which aimed to transform the school into a family. The school in Yasnaya Polyana operated in one of the houses located on the estate. One of the teachers at Tolstoy's school once wrote, "Lev Nikolaevich himself taught at his school. He invited students to become teachers for the schools he opened, among whom were those involved in the unrest at the time, stemming from the introduction of matriculation and eventually shifting to political matters." Lev Nikolaevich pointed out the futility of these disturbances and called for productive work on the education of the people, whom he saw as the source of truth, goodness, and beauty, but a source that remained closed due to the lack of organs capable of revealing its inner content. In the following years, the writer would speak about how difficult and even shameful it sometimes felt to write stories and novels for the intelligentsia, because after observing their lives and comparing them to the hard-working lives of the peasants, he felt ashamed for engaging in such trivialities and often wished he could abandon it once and for all. To put it in simple modern language, Lev Tolstoy at that time seemed different from anybody else. And that would have been fine, but as he reached such a broad mass of people, not only in his country, but also abroad, his entire activity caught the attention, let's put it mildly, of the authorities and everybody connected to them. As mentioned earlier, they began to see him as an enemy. The same teacher from Tolstoy school once wrote, "Gendarmes would come without him conducting searches, but, of course, without results. Lev Nikolaevich was indifferent to politics, and he taught us all to avoid it. The gendarmes were sent to Yasnaya Polyana probably due to the displeasure Lev Nikolaevich stirred up as a peace mediator." The search happened unexpectedly, as is known due to an anonymous tip-off. The gendarmes entered Yasnaya Polyana and turned everything upside down, looking for something suspicious or some printed, prohibited literature. All of the writers' records and diaries were examined, and it went as far as tearing up some floors in the buildings and trying to fish out a printing press from a pond. Of course, nothing was found, but this action sparked a great deal of anger in the writer and led Tolstoy to shut down his school. Additionally, this, of course, damaged the trust and relationship in general with peasants. At that time, they got so frightened by this search. However, let's remember that the education of peasants in his later years until the rest of his days remained always present in the writer's life. Of course, in addition to the children of peasants, the life of Lev Nikolaevich was also occupied by his own children. He and his wife had 13, although 5 of them died in early childhood. But even in his role as a father, and perhaps as a husband as well, Lev Tolstoy was unlike most. If you read the diaries of his wife or children, you might already know this. However, I'd like to share some notes from his sons. For example, the eldest son Sergei Tolstoy wrote in his essays, "I couldn't withstand the gaze of his keen, small, still eyes, and when he asked me something, and he loved to ask questions that you wouldn't like to answer, I couldn't lie, nor could I avoid the answer. He wasn't affectionate in the usual ways, no kisses, gifts, or sweet words, and he rarely gave us toys, but we always felt his love for us and knew whether he was pleased with our behavior or not." His second son, Ilya Tolstoy, confirmed this in his own recollections, remembering that his father never expressed his love through open, direct affection and always seemed embarrassed by such displays. In their childhood, these gestures of love were called excessive tenderness. He also added, "The immense strength of my father as an educator lay in the fact that one couldn't hide from him, as if he were your own conscience. He knew everything, and deceiving him was the same as deceiving yourself. It was both hard and pointless." Let's dive a little deeper into the atmosphere of the Tolstoy family home. The house was almost always full of warmth, laughter, guests' music, and of course, reading books. According to the records of all family members, Tolstoy's secretaries, the family doctor, and guests of the state, every evening before going to bed, the living room would come alive. Everyone would take their seats and set aside time for reading, and it wasn't always the head of the family doing the reading. Sometimes it was one of the children or even guests. Many noted that Tolstoy was an exceptional reader. According to his son Sergei, Tolstoy knew how to read, which is something not everyone can do. It's well known that he ranked Dickens above all other English novelists. From French literature, he particularly valued Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, and among realists, Maupassant. He recommended works of world literature that could be enjoyed by both children and adults, such as Robinson Crusoe, Don Quixote, Gulliver's Travels, and Dickens's Oliver Twist and David Copperfield. From Russian literature, he particularly recommended the prose of Pushkin and Gogol, while his son wrote. He didn't encourage them to read his own works except for some stories. In addition to reading, music was often heard in the Tolstoy home. According to the memories of one of the writer's children's teachers, we read, "Of all the arts, music had the greatest effect on Lev Nikolaevich. It captivated him, completely taken over. When listening to good music, he would become deeply moved and even brought to tears. He couldn't help but listen to the sounds of music, even if it reached him through 3 locked doors from the room where his son Sergei was playing." Tolstoy didn't like opera, believing that it was impossible to combine 2 arts, music and drama, because such a combination didn't enhance the action of either, but rather weakened it. From the recollections of those surrounding him, we can say that the favorite music of Tolstoy was simple folk music. "The best composer is the people," he said. However, Tolstoy was very often seen at the piano, playing works by Chopin or Beethoven. According to his children's memories, Tolstoy sometimes played 4 hands with his wife, which they both greatly enjoyed. And since we started talking about art in general, let's look at some other notes and recollections related to Tolstoy's views on art. For example, I personally was very surprised. It was very interesting for me to learn that Tolstoy had a negative attitude towards poetry and poets. One of Tolstoy's children teacher once wrote, "Tolstoy didn't like poetry. He said that the poetic form restricts the expression of the writer's thoughts and feelings. When depicting thought and feeling with words, prose gives more freedom, while poetry constrains, requiring the writer to conform to the structure of the phrase, to follow a certain size, and even to find a rhyme." However, by the end of his life, as noted by Gusev, Tolstoy's secretary, from 1907-1909, Tolstoy spoke about a visit from a merchant, a conversation with whom helped him rid himself of one of his countless flaws. "He writes poetry," Tolstoy said. "I used to always look at people who wrote poetry with almost contempt, but now I see that this happens as a result of a high spiritual uplift that a person cannot express." In the same secretary's recollections, we also read about Tolstoy's favorite artist, Orlov, and his paintings of peasant life. Tolstoy would take guests to his study and show them photographs of Orlov's paintings of peasant life hanging on the walls. With tears in his eyes, he would tell them the story behind each painting. Tolstoy expressed his absolute negative opinion towards decadence and often spoke about how art, like people, changes for the worse. Semyonov, a writer from a peasant background who was highly respected by Tolstoy, once wrote, "He was astonished at how people of the higher classes were increasingly drawn to art and demanded less and less substance from it, adapting it solely for pleasure. This irritated him, and he would say, it's because of their overindulgence. They've gorged on everything and now demand that art provide them with nothing but enjoyment. They find poetry where there is no poetry at all. They pay serious attention to what, frankly, one would want to spit on, and in this way they corrupt themselves and corrupt artists." Here's another interesting memory from a note by one of Tolstoy's acquaintances. Tolstoy argued that people who belonged to the so-called upper class admired Shakespeare only because they felt it was necessary to do so, simply following the widely accepted belief in his genius, but they never stopped to consider what the actual global significance of Shakespeare's works was. One of the most prominent traits of Leo Tolstoy was the combination of his kindness and the desire and ability to defend his own views with great strength in any conversation. In another reflection, we read, "He treated every partner in a conversation as his equal. He argued passionately and sharply, but one had to witness the pure, sincere joy in his eyes when he found sympathy in his listener or saw that his thoughts were understood." I came away with the firm belief that every word of Tolstoy's came from the depths of his heart, and his preaching was the result not only of the greatest intellectual effort, but also of the most profound emotional suffering. The secretary mentioned that Tolstoy was the same with everyone in his interactions. He did not change his manner of dealing with or speaking to anyone, always trying to make them feel pleased and saying something nice, but with all the fervor of a person firmly convinced of his own truth. He would passionately defend in conversation with anyone what he believed to be the truth, not fearing to ruin his relations with that person, and not afraid to say things that were completely contrary to common opinions. As I have already mentioned, today Yasnaya Polyana was always full of people, as it is actually now. If you have noticed in the videos that I filmed that there were no people at all, it was, trust me, just a pure coincidence and my luck. My visit fell on a weekday morning and the weather was quite windy, but in general, this place is full of tourist guests. But in Tolstoy's times, people came here to specifically meet him, and they came from all over, not only from different corners of his country, but from all over the world. People came to meet Tolstoy for various reasons, to ask for advice on faith. Some wanted his feedback on their writings, and of course there were famous people who wanted to meet Leo Tolstoy, some of whom were close family friends. For example, artists Nikolai Ge and Ilya Repin, both of whom painted magnificent portraits of Tolstoy. Writers Ivan Turgenev, Afanasy Fet, Maxim Gorky, Anton Chekhov, biologist Ilya Mechnikov, and many others also visited. Ilya Repin made various sketches of Tolstoy from life, as well as fascinating recollections of him. Let's have a look. Familiar and completely unfamiliar people, the artist wrote, sometimes from very distant corners of Russia and other countries, come to him specifically with the most diverse questions about life. In his soulful conversations and responsive heart, these seeking people find much consolation, clarification, and deeply rational truths. In August 1891, in Yasnaya Polyana, Repin continues, I saw Lev Nikolaevich already simplified in appearance. This was reflected in his clothes: black homemade blouse, black trousers without any particular style, and a white cap with a visor, quite worn. And despite all these shabby clothes, with shoes on bare feet, his figure was striking in its impressive presence. His daunting, looming eyes were those of an unquestionable ruler. No one would dare approach him casually or treat him with mockery, but he was the kindest soul, the most delicate of people, and a true aristocrat in his manners and special eloquence. How considerate, generous, and simple he is in his dealings with everyone. We have reached the part of the video where we can talk about one of the most interesting and mysterious stages in Tolstoy's life, his entire ideology and lifestyle that he pursued until his final days. The idea of simplification, which his followers, the Tolstoyans, later tried to implement and practice. Tolstoyan movement was a sort of ethical teaching that emerged under the influence of Leo Tolstoy religious philosophical ideas in 1880s, spreading even beyond Russia. Perhaps you already know that some of the main characteristics of the Tolstoyan movement include pacifism, universal forgiveness, refusal of violence, moral self-improvement, and others. Tolstoy's followers believed in the moral transformation of society and sought to bring it to life. However, it is also worth noting that, as in any good cause, among the followers of the Tolstoyan movement there were many dishonest and pretentious people who could only appear morally and spiritually pure in front of others or in front of Tolstoy himself. They would eat vegetarian food at the table, but then just after leaving Yasnaya Polyana they would indulge in fried chicken while gossiping about others behind their backs. Of course, Leo Tolstoy was aware of the existence of such individuals, and this caused him both indignation and sadness. Moreover, he sometimes found himself repulsive for not fully living according to the principles he preached. One of the reasons to this was his wife, who flatly rejected the idea of living their life in Yasnaya Polyana and starting to live just a simple peasant life. And here we place absolutely no blame on her. She too can be totally understood. However, Tolstoy refused to receive any royalties for his works in order to offer his labor to readers absolutely free, out of charge, which of course caused his wife distress. How would we live? What about our children? Eventually, this led him to renounce the rights of his works, transferring all rights to his wife. Note: for works written before 1881. In the early 1890s, Leo Tolstoy also transferred his property, including Yasnaya Polyana, to his family. to his wife in order to have no land in his name, as it conflicted with his opinions and views on life. Tolstoy must have been approached many times with statements like this. It is necessary that there is no glaring contradiction between your teaching and your life. I know all of this, and I am striving with all my soul, but I cannot break free. And you know what? Because I am afraid to step over blood, over a corpse, and that is so terrifying that it's better to drag this repulsive life to the end, no matter how hard it is. And who knows, perhaps this is the very cross that I am meant to bear. By the way, if you want to explore more the movement that was born from Tolstoy's ideas, I have something for you. Last year, I created a whole book magazine issue dedicated to the Tolstoyan movement, a deep dive into the people who followed his philosophy and how they tried to bring his vision to life. If you've ever been curious about the Tolstoyan movement, this issue will take you there. And if you'd like to have all the memories I am mentioning in this video, and actually even more, you'll love my special bookworm magazine issue of this month, this time in the form of a quote book. Tolstoy's words are so powerful that they stay with you long after you've read them. That's why I wanted to create something special, filled with the quotes I mentioned in this video and many more that have truly moved me. I really put my heart into the magazines I create, so if any of these speak to you, if you want to bring a little bit of Tolstoy's world into yours, you can get them. I'll leave the link below. Whatever we read about Tolstoy's relationship with his wife and the different views on how to live life, we must not forget that she always remained his right hand in everything, loving him deeply. Tolstoy, for his part, despite deciding to leave Yasnaya Polyana toward the end of his life and choosing to go to a monastery or elsewhere he could live out his life away from wealth and excesses, always thought of his wife. From the memoirs of his doctor who accompanied him during the time the writer left his home, we see how he worried about her, and just a few days before his death, at the train station, he asked her not to come. He could not bear to see her. Was he afraid to look her in the eyes? Did he fear not being able to endure all the emotions that his departure stirred up in his family, and especially in her? Was this the reason, or one of them, for his nervous breakdown that eventually led to his death? Perhaps no one will ever be able to answer these questions. The final days of Leo Tolstoy were as complex as his whole life, leaving us with a deep mystery. Who was he really? Was he the ascetic moralist, the revolutionary thinker, or the loving family man? Perhaps the answer is not for us to know. But what can take away from his life is the profound impact he left on the world and the moral questions he still challenges us to ask even today. So what was Leo Tolstoy like? The answer to this question will be different for each of us readers. The answer to this question can only be found on the pages of his works and nowhere else. I really hope you have enjoyed this time and found a few topics for reflection. Most importantly, I hope it made you want to pick up a book on the cover of which it says Leo Tolstoy, and immerse yourself in the world that was created by this wonderful writer. I couldn't think of a better way to end this video than with the quote from Lev Tolstoy said by him just before his death. Let's believe that Lev Nikolaevich will not blame us.